how does a man with, fewer than 100 followers mathematically break a nation's internet?
Well, according to the laws of statistical physics, he can't.
Right. He literally can't. Yet today, we're looking at a case where the legal system attempts to put the very laws of thermodynamics and network topology on trial.
It's wild. It's this remarkable collision of worldviews.
Hmm.
We are unpacking a fascinating stack of cross-disciplinary sources today, ranging from personality psychology to complex network theory.
Yeah, and it's all focused on one specific legal event, which is the case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, so Dr. Chen is a scholar who is accused by a judicial system of causing a, and I'm quoting here, serious disorder of public order.
Right, but the mechanism of this supposed disruption wasn't, a physical act. It was just forwards and retweets on his personal social media account.
Exactly, just social media activity.
So our mission today is to really explore what happens when the rigid, linear language of the judicial system collides head-on with the highly complex, nonlinear realities of the human mind and digital networks.
It's a huge mismatch.
It really is. And look, before we get into the weeds, I want to set a clear parameter for you listening. These sources analyze a deeply sensitive legal and political event.
Definitely.
We are not here to endorse the original author's viewpoints or take political sides or even comment on the actual legal ruling. Our goal is strictly to impartially unpack the scientific frameworks, the math, the physics, and the psychology that the authors used to deconstruct this whole case.
That framing is so crucial because the sources argue that to understand the physical accusation, you first have to understand the fundamental psychological mismatch between the two parties.
Right. It wasn't just a disagreement about the facts.
No, not at all. They frame this conflict as an absolute structural incompatibility in how the two sides process reality itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with Dr. Chen's psychological profile. The sources analyze him using the Big Five personality traits and the hexagon model, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they point out that he scores extraordinarily high in a trait called openness to experience.
Yeah, and in psychological terms, extreme openness doesn't just mean you enjoy trying new foods or whatever.
Right, it goes way deeper.
Exactly. It manifests as this relentless drive to seek ultimate truth. You have a very high tolerance for ambiguity and a natural gravitation toward abstract, complex theories.
Which explains his defense strategy.
Yes. When Dr. Chen was defending himself, he wasn't just offering a simple denial like, I didn't do it. He was citing complexity science, network topology, and Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
Oh, wow. He was literally trying to explain the structural nature of truth to a court of law.
Exactly.
And the sources pair that high openness with his scores on the hexaco model, specifically the honesty-humility dimension, alongside high autonomy and low compliance.
Which is a very specific matrix.
Right. From a practical standpoint, someone with this specific wiring possesses a profound, almost structural inability to say things they don't genuinely believe just to, appease an authority figure.
Yeah, it completely goes against their psychological makeup to offer a strategic, simplified confession just to get a lighter sentence.
So that's Dr. Chen. Now look at the entity sitting across the table.
The judicial system.
Right. Institutions develop what organizational psychologists call a role-based personality. And the mandate of a legal system requires it to operate with high authoritarianism and very low openness.
Yeah, the entire function of a court is to take a messy, complex world and categorize it into clear binary rules. True or false, right or wrong.
Guilty or innocent.
Exactly.
Us.
By design, the system has zero tolerance for ambiguity.
It makes me think of, it's like a jazz musician trying to explain the beauty of improvisation to a classical metronome.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, because the jazz musician operates in a world of syncopation, playing slightly behind the beat, exploring the space. But the metronome is built for one singular purpose: strict, unrelenting tempo.
Yeah.
When the metronome interacts with the jazz musician, it cannot perceive the syncopation as art. It can only process it as a dangerous malfunction.
And the authors argue that this is exactly how the legal system processed Dr. Chen. Because the system's personality is structurally incapable of processing nonlinear philosophical defenses, it just filters his behavior through the only categories it actually possesses.
So his academic integrity gets reinterpreted.
Exactly. His refusal to accept a simplified binary narrative is systematically reinterpreted as malice, defiance, and a stubborn refusal to repent.
You see variations of this in everyday life all the time. Think about being deeply misunderstood at work or in a relationship. Not because someone is lying, but because your internal operating system's process rules so differently that you're essentially speaking mutually unintelligible cognitive languages.
Yeah, it's like you're on completely different frequencies. But, the psychology only explains the breakdown in communication.
Right. Why they couldn't understand each other.
Exactly.
Mm.
But the sources quickly pivot from the architecture of the mind to the architecture of the machine, because the psychological mismatch doesn't answer the core physical accusation.
Right. Did his retweets actually possess the capacity to disrupt public order?
Right. Did he actually break the internet?
So let's test the physical reality of that. If the psychological analysis suggests Dr. Chen's refusal to confess was based on his understanding of complex reality, we have to look at the computer science to see if he was actually right about the network.
And this is where the sources introduced the EAP theorem.
Right, the CAP theorem. What does that theorem actually demonstrate about social media networks?
Well, the CAP theorem is a foundational principle in distributed database theory. It mathematically proves that in any vast distributed network like Twitter, Weibo, or even a global banking infrastructure, you can only ever guarantee 2 of 3 specific properties at the same time.
And those three are consistency, availability, and partition tolerance, right?
Exactly. Consistency, availability, and partition tolerance.
Okay, let's ground those terms for the listener. Partition tolerance means the system can survive network connections dropping or, servers lagging.
Which is unavoidable in a global system.
Right, it's just a reality of physics. So the network has to tolerate partitions. That leaves a choice between consistency and availability.
And that's exactly the choice every platform faces. Consistency means every single user sees the exact same data at the exact same millisecond.
Which sounds ideal, but
But if you want to guarantee that, you have to freeze the entire network every time a single server lags anywhere in the world, which obviously sacrifices availability.
right, and social networks are fundamentally designed to be highly available, 247 across billions of devices.
Exactly. Because they optimize for availability and partition tolerance, the theorem proves they mathematically must sacrifice perfect consistency.
So the legal system is demanding a perfectly orderly, consistent digital environment, but the computer science dictates that disorder or inconsistency isn't an anomaly caused by a bad actor.
No, not at all.
It is an intrinsic, built-in physical property of how the network operates.
The chaos is the baseline. What's fascinating here is how the sources build on this by examining the specific topology of these platforms. They use the concept of scale-free networks and the power law.
Okay, explain that a bit.
Basically, these networks do not distribute influence evenly. They are heavily skewed architectures dominated by a tiny fraction of massive hubs. Think state media accounts, mega influencers, entities with millions and millions of interconnected links.
While the remaining 99% of users are what network scientists call edge nodes.
Right.
They sit on the extreme periphery. And Dr. Chen, with his microscopic follower count and near-zero engagement metrics, represents the ultimate long-tail edge node.
And the synthesis the authors make here is striking. If a system is mathematically designed to be inconsistent, and you observe chaotic background noise, blaming that structural inconsistency on a microscopic edge node is a profound categorical error.
It's like prosecuting a single drop of rain for making the ocean wet.
That's a perfect analogy.
The ocean's fundamental state is wet. The drop's presence didn't alter the state of the ocean.
Exactly. The legal accusation relies heavily on classical mechanical physics. It assumes this linear traceable cause and effect where a single node's action directly caused a network-wide disruption.
Right, A caused B.
Right. But modern computer science demonstrates that in a scale-free, distributed architecture, that kind of linear causality is structurally impossible.
Okay, but to play devil's advocate for a moment, we've all seen random people go viral out of nowhere, right?
Sure.
We've all seen a random user with 12 followers post a video that suddenly explodes across the internet, gets picked up by algorithms, and dominates the news cycle. The legal system seems to be leaning on the butterfly effect.
The idea that a tiny flap of a wing can cause a tornado.
Exactly. Couldn't his tiny retweet theoretically flap its wings and cause a tornado of public disorder? Why doesn't that apply here?
Well, the butterfly effect is a popular cultural shorthand, but it's frequently misapplied. To explain why it fails as a framework here, the sources turn to statistical physics. specifically focusing on self-organized criticality and avalanche dynamics.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Walk us through how statistical physics dismantles the butterfly effect in this specific context.
Okay, so physicists often explain self-organized criticality using the sandpile model.
Uh-huh.
Picture dropping grains of sand one by one onto a flat surface.
Just a normal pile of sand?
Right. Initially, they just form a small, stable mound. You can drop hundreds of grains, and the energy dissipates harmlessly down the sides. But eventually, the slope of the pile reaches a highly unstable, hyperfragile angle.
And that's what physicists call a critical state.
Yes, and once it hits that critical state, dropping just one additional grain causes the catastrophic avalanche down the side.
And that is the visual that tricks the observer, right? It looks like the single grain possessed the immense power to cause the avalanche.
Exactly. But statistical physics reveals a completely different story. The grain of sand only caused the avalanche because the entire pile was already primed to collapse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if you drop that exact same grain onto a stable pile, nothing happens. The trigger is practically irrelevant. It's the underlying state of the system that dictates whether an avalanche is even possible.
So the judicial system is essentially prosecuting the grain of sand, completely ignoring the steepness of the slope.
It is a fundamental misattribution of physics. And the sources take it further by mathematically quantifying the slope of Dr. Chen's specific sand pile.
How do they do that?
They use a branching process, specifically the Galton-Watson theorem, to calculate a metric called the mean offspring, or dollar.
Okay, so we're talking about the branching coefficient of an information cascade.
Right.
Like, how many new retweets, statistically speaking, does one initial retweet generate as data packets move through the network topology?
Precisely. And for any cascade or avalanche to sustain itself, the null value must be strictly greater than 1.
Right, because each generation must produce more activity than the last.
Exactly. If nullers is less than 1, the spread mathematically degrades with every generation until it reaches absolute 0. It just dies out.
And the authors applied this specific theorem to Dr. Chen's network footprint.
They did. Factoring in his follower count, active user ratios, and historical engagement rates, his calculated value wasn't anywhere near 1.
What was it?
It was approximately 0.12.
0.12. Wow.
Yeah, and an dollar value of day per 2012 places his network activity in what physicists classify as the deep subcritical zone.
Let's visualize that math for a second. A dollar value of bearer 0.12 means that for every 100 times his message is seen, it generates 12 reactions. And in the next generation, those 12 generate 1.4 reactions. The cascade isn't just unlikely to cause a network-wide avalanche, the thermodynamic reality of the environment forbids it.
It literally cannot happen.
It's the equivalent of trying to start a roaring forest fire by dropping a single match into a freezing, waterlogged swamp. The environment extinguishes the energy immediately.
The extinction probability of his information cascade mathematically approaches 100%. Therefore, the probability that his specific action caused societal-level chaos approaches 0.
So the butterfly effect is totally debunked here.
Completely. The butterfly effect requires a system already pushed to a supercritical state, and it requires the butterfly to be the actual tipping point. The statistical physics definitively proves Dr. Chen was neither.
Okay, so we've used psychological frameworks to uncover why the institutions couldn't decipher his motives. We've used the CAP theorem to prove the network's inherent disorder, and we've used avalanche dynamics to mathematically eliminate him as the source of a network collapse.
Yeah, the math just clears him.
Which forces a much larger, frankly more uncomfortable question. If the edge node, the everyday citizens with minimal reach, lack the mathematical capacity to cause these societal avalanches, who actually possesses that power?
And that's the real kicker. The authors use that exact question to turn the entire scientific framework back onto the accusers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they introduce the concept of network robustness. Specifically, they examine Cohen's critical threshold formula.
Let's break down the mechanics of Cohen's formula. Why is it so crucial for understanding where the real danger lies?
Well, Cohen's formula analyzes the structural integrity of scale-free networks when nodes are removed or malfunction. And the math reveals this incredible asymmetry.
What kind of asymmetry?
Because the vast majority users are weakly connected edge nodes, you can randomly delete or silence nearly the entire population of edge nodes, and the network will not fragment.
Wait, really? The network just stays intact?
Totally intact. The overall flow of information effortlessly routes around the damage.
So a scale-free network is almost completely immune to random edge node failures. But there's a vulnerability somewhere, right?
A massive one. While the network survives edge node deletion, it is catastrophically vulnerable to targeted attacks on its hubs.
The mega influencers and institutions?
Exactly. If a hub node, one of those highly connected centers of influence malfunctions, is corrupted or is removed, it orphans millions of connections simultaneously.
The network fragments into isolated islands.
And the structural integrity collapses entirely.
The analogy that comes to mind is an architectural arch made of stone. The edge nodes are, the random bricks near the base. You can chip away at them, pull a few out entirely, and the arch remains perfectly stable.
Right.
But the hub node is the keystone at the very top center. If you shift the keystone even slightly, the entire arch shatters under its own weight.
That is the precise mechanical dynamic. And the authors of the sources argue that in the real world, these keystone hub nodes are the institutions wielding massive systemic power.
The media conglomerates, the tech platforms.
And the governmental and judicial systems themselves.
Wow. That dramatically recontextualizes the whole legal event. The risk of a true societal avalanche doesn't originate from a citizen on the periphery sharing an article. The genuine existential risk originates from the keystones.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when a powerful keystone institution, an entity operating with extremely low openness, high authoritarianism, and massive network reach acts entirely outside of societal consensus.
Yeah.
Or when it forcibly applies 19th century linear rules to a highly complex nonlinear human network, that action alters the structural integrity of the entire system.
They are the entities with enough mass to actually steepen the slope of the sandpile.
Exactly. They push the entire society into that hyper-fragile, supercritical state where any random grain of sand might set it off.
It is a profound misallocation of attention and blame. The authors really challenge us to evaluate the complex systems we all operate within.
Yeah, how often do we see leaders or institutions hyper-focused on policing the completely harmless activities of peripheral edge nodes, while remaining willfully blind to the massive systemic vulnerabilities they themselves are creating at the hub level?
You see this dynamic in corporate structures constantly. I mean, think about it. Are the executives at your company obsessing over minuscule discrepancies in middle management expense reports?
Right, policing the edge nodes.
While aggressively ignoring the fact that their core product strategy, the hub, is actively destroying the company's market position. We naturally punch down at the periphery rather than address the complexity at the center.
Because addressing the complexity at the center requires high openness. It requires abandoning the comfort of binary rules and actually engaging with the nonlinear, often unpredictable nature of the actual environment.
Man, we have covered some truly incredible ground today. We started by mapping the big five personality traits, revealing how a deeply truth-seeking mind is structurally incompatible with a rigid authoritarian system.
Yeah, and then we shifted into computer science and the CAP theorem, demonstrating that digital networks are fundamentally designed to operate with built-in inconsistency.
From there, we utilized statistical physics and avalanche dynamics to calculate that a user operating deep in the subcritical zone has a mathematical probability of 0 of initiating network-wide chaos.
Right. And finally, we explored network robustness to entirely flip the narrative. We showed how interdisciplinary science doesn't merely clear the edge node of responsibility. It mathematically points the finger squarely at the keystone hub nodes as the true drivers of systemic instability.
The entire exercise is a complete deconstruction of our default reliance on linear cause and effect narratives. So what does this all mean?
Ultimately, the sources reveal the severe friction of trying to regulate the quantum age using diagnostic tools built for the STEAM age.
That's a great way to frame it. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a concept to mull over on your own, building on everything we've just explored. We currently operate within a civilization where our laws, our justice systems, and our fundamental societal rules are heavily anchored in 19th century linear mechanical physics. You pull a lever, a gear turns, A directly causes B.
But we don't live in that world anymore.
No, we don't. We inhabit a 21st century digital reality governed by quantum-level complexity, algorithmic amplification, and highly volatile non-linear dynamics.
Oh.
As artificial intelligence and deeply entangled global networks continue to accelerate, making our world vastly more complex and significantly less predictable, how long can our linear laws survive?
Yeah.
How long until the rigid metronomes completely break down under the crushing, undeniable weight of complex reality? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the architecture of the systems around you. Seek out the underlying mechanics, and the next time someone tries to explain the dynamics of a hurricane by pointing to the gears of a pocket watch, you'll know exactly why the math just doesn't add up.